The British Prime Minister is entering the 2024 election year with a poor track record. Only a shock victory in another election could persuade the British to reconsider Brexit. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak started the last year with 5 promises, and he was only able to achieve one of them, halving the inflation rate. And the fact that the Conservative head of government's track record is so poor at the beginning of the 2024 election year has not only to do with Brexit, but it has to do with it. 7.5 years after the ill-fated referendum, leaving the EU still determines the politics, the economy, and the national mood in the kingdom. And to illustrate this, one need only go through the 4 promises that Sunak failed to make, and I did this last week already, but this is important for this year. His most official and difficult project was to get the British economy back on a growth path, and although the GDP has now returned to pre-pandemic levels, the economy has stagnated since then and even shrank in the third quarter of 2023. And even the outlook for this year is bleak. The OECD expects a meager increase of 0.7%. And Sunak can no longer just always tell his compatriots that are really in deep problems with their money by just saying that they are still doing better than Germany. Brexit didn't cause all of Britain's economic problems, but it made them all worse. And this diagnosis by US economist and former British central banker Adam Posen is still true today. It is true that some of the causes of Great Britain's weak growth go back long before the EU exit. Economists have been complaining for decades about weak productivity, but also too little private and public investment and the frequent changes in direction in British politics. But it is also true that Brexit has exacerbated these chronic weaknesses. While an open economy like Great Britain would cut itself off from its most important export market and thereby start a trade war against itself, still remains a mystery to this day. And at the turn of the year, the British Chamber of Commerce highlighted the high costs and trade barriers that had often become an insurmountable obstacle for many British companies when trading goods with the EU. And British financial service providers are still also waiting for permanent access to the EU internal market, as London has now negotiated for Switzerland. But that is quite a different case. The balance and outlook for the influx of immigrants and refugees are no better. This take back control was the rallying cry of the Brexit supporters. However, there can be no question of this. The number of legal immigrants rose to a new record of 750,000 by the end of 2022. That's more than twice as high as before Brexit. The number of refugees, most of whom immigrated illegally across the English Channel, fell by around a third last year. However, Sunak was still unable to fulfill his promise to stop the refugee boats. And his plan to simply deport the boat refugees to Rwanda failed in the courts and might fail in British Parliament in the new year, so in this year now. The fact that the EU is now tightening the asylum law for refugees and that Rwanda models are also floating around in the minds of German conservatives shows that the refugee crisis is a global problem and that Europe needs a common solution to it. The British exceptional path is misleading. A direct consequence of immigration policy, which was ideologically heated up by Brexit, is that Sunak also failed to achieve his goal of reducing long waiting times in the NHS. The NHS is short of doctors and nurses after many of them had to or wanted to leave the country after leaving the EU. And although the gap in the NHS can only be closed with the help of foreign skilled workers, supporters of a hard Brexit insist that legal immigration should also be reduced across the board with drastic deterrent measures. For a country that likes to rely on its traditional pragmatism, this ideological self-shackling is quite grotesque. And the ongoing problem in the health system are symbolic of the plight of many public services. Sunak had promised to ensure that their national debt falls so they can secure the future of public services. However, shortly before the end of the year, the state statistics watchdog contradicted the Prime Minister, who had already considered his mission accomplished. However, national debt has risen to just under 100% of GDP, and is not expected to decline slightly until 2028. And even this forecast can only be achieved if the government accepts real spending cuts in many public services. And this is the dilemma of a stagnant economy. However, Sunak's 1-4 defeat will not mean that the British, disappointed by Brexit, and the Tories will return to the EU anytime soon. Even the Labour Party would not lead the still traumatized kingdom into another test after a victory in the upcoming general election. Only a shock victory for Donald Trump in the US presidential election could perhaps persuade the islanders to think again about Brexit. And one thing they might have a look on is that consumers in the UK suffered the worst inflation in a generation in 2023, with the issue dominating household finances and causing misery for millions. Food inflation hit a more than 45-year high of 19.6% in March, and while price rises have slowed, they are still 9% higher than a year ago. The head of food policy, Sue Davis, said, "We've seen the worst inflation in which a generation in 2023, and while the rate at which prices are going up is slowing, food prices are still unbearably high for many." As a category, butters and spreads now cost less than this time last year. However, the prices of everyday essentials may never return to the prices shoppers were used to before the cost of living crisis began. Budget range products remain the cheapest items on supermarket shelves, but may not be accessible to those who rely on more expensive convenience stores. And this is why they say that they've been calling for supermarkets to help those who are struggling by making sure affordable food is available in smaller branches. And likewise, households endured yet another year of energy bill misery, as the ongoing effects of the pandemic and Russia's invasion of Ukraine highlighted the UK's susceptibility to the highly volatile wholesale market. The year started with Ofgem's energy price cap rocketing to more than £4,000 a year for the typical household, although households received £400 towards their bills, which were limited by the government's energy price guarantee to an average of £2,500. Bills have dropped since then, but the price cap will rise slightly again to just over £1,900 from January 1st, and still significantly higher than before the energy crisis began. Headline inflation has dropped back with an unexpectedly sharp fall to its lowest level for more than 2 years last month, reinforcing forecasts for the Bank of England to start cutting interest rates early in 2024. Official figures showed falling fuel prices and another drop in food inflation, helped by falls in bread and cereals, where prices dropped 0.8% on the month compared with a rise of 1.9% a year ago. That drove the consumer price index down to 3.9% in November from 4.6% in October, and the lowest level since September 21. It marked another dramatic decline after inflation dropped from 6.7% in September to 4.6% in October, which led to Prime Minister Rishi Sunak declaring an early victory in his goal to halve inflation by the end of the year. But the bank has been quick to warn recently that the job of bringing inflation back to its 2% target is far from done, and it has poured cold water on speculation over an imminent interest rate cut. The situation could also change rapidly. A spike in fuel prices or strong growth in wages could still lead to a rate rise. And similarly, if the economy looked to be weakening, a rate cut could materialize sooner than anticipated. There's also the suggestion that headline inflation may increase slightly early in this new year as the CPI basket is reweighted and the household energy price cap is increased by 5% since yesterday when I filmed this. While agricultural commodity prices are generally falling, they remain 21% higher than they were pre-pandemic. And there have been significant price rises in cocoa, reaching a 25-year high, while olive oil prices are almost double than a year ago. The recent navigation turmoil in the Red Sea will likely add to the inflationary pressures on the sector, with global shipping rates increasing by 10% since the start of the month. And while optimism usually accompanies a new year, in 2024 it's anticipated to be another challenging period given the prevailing pessimism in economic growth. And experts expect inflation to stabilize and interest rates to remain where they are. Economic stability is crucial to focus on economic recovery. Consumer confidence remained key, and that a general election would inevitably lead to a period of instability. Jack Meaning, the chief UK economist at Barclays, said, although 2024 will be a tough year for the economy as a whole, the new year is time to look for the positives. We expect to see the Bank of England start easing interest rates from the middle of the year, and in fact, we are already seeing mortgage rates come down in anticipation. This is as the speed of price rises slows, which should continue to provide at least some boost to the spending power of people who have been squeezed through the cost of living crisis. 2024 will be a year of transition from headwinds to tailwinds, but come next December, we should be able to toast the new year with more festive spirit, he says. And I say, if you want to see something else right now, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.